I'm talking about Kerry's race and these other Senate races where they're so very close, where Trump carries the state, yet you have these statewide Senate candidates who are very narrowly losing.
Yeah, so I think this is all about optics and knowing that many MAGA supporters are still very, very low resolution in how they look at elections. So many people are going, landslide, Trump won, and let's crack a beer and celebrate. And the rest of us are going, oh my goodness, this is actually much more pernicious than people believe. They knew that they weren't going to get anyone to believe that Harris outperformed Trump this time around. It's impossible. But
thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Joining us today is our friend David Clements. He has been in the ring for every fight for truth since COVID, and he's been such a steadfast voice for the J6ers who rarely have the opportunity to be a voice for themselves. I know what you've done for them, David, is just really provide them with encouragement, and they know that they feel seen. They feel seen and they feel prayed for, and that's just an incredible thing that you've been doing. Before we get into the conversation today about all things election fraud, and the incoming Trump administration, let me read the scripture of the day. It's Psalm chapter 49, verses 10 to 14. And y'all are going to really love this one. I know you will. The brightest and the best, along with the foolish and the senseless, God sees that they will all die one day, leaving their houses and their wealth to others. Even though they name streets and lands after themselves, hoping to have their memory endure beyond the grave, legends in their own minds, their home address is now the cemetery. The honor of man is short-lived and fleeting. There's little difference between man and beast, for both will one day perish. Such is the path of foolish men and those who quote everything they say, for they are here today and gone tomorrow. A shepherd called Death herds them, leading them like mindless sheep straight to hell. Yet, at daybreak, you will find the righteous ruling in their place. Every trace of them will be gone forever, with all their quote-unquote glory lost in the darkness of their doom. But I know the loving God will redeem my soul, raising me up from the dark power of death, taking me as his bridal partner. And that's how I felt on November 6th. It was like daybreak in America, and it was like the Lord was saving us. Not like the Lord was saving us, I really felt, from the dark power of death. And so many people I've talked to have said how they've literally felt weight lift off of them. Chris, you talked about Katie saying that she felt a weight lift off of her when she woke up on November 6th and knew that Donald Trump was going to be leading our nation again. Of course, we've had to say this so many times, and Trump has said it himself. It's not about him. He's an amazing man, but it's about what he stands for, and it's about what he represents, which is a return to righteous leadership, a return to justice, and to the foundational principles of our country, which came from the Word of God. And when it comes to the wicked and all of the horrible injustices that they have been committing, the atrocities that they commit behind closed doors, God sees it all. And they're not escaping his judgment. And I believe that they will see it here on earth and will witness it before they meet the Lord face to face. I really do, because exposure, justice, and closure are needed for our nation to change and move forward. If people don't know what's been taking place, there's no way to right wrongs or to heal, then we're stuck. So I truly believe that days of justice and exposure are in our future, not just in the afterlife for those people who have done so many horrible things, but I think we'll see it with our own eyes.
Yeah, that's so well said, Danielle. And, the Psalm is so optimistic and so hopeful, and while David is talking about, his individual redemption, we're talking about our national redemption. And many people realized, and I certainly believed, that, Trump's election was the last opportunity for us to return our country to its foundational principles. If he had lost the election, I'm an eternal optimist, and obviously I would have continued to fight, even as I'll continue to fight now, but I would have been very, very sad and down about that loss because it would have been so hard for us to return from it. Yet immediately, David Clements, we get this narrative right soon after President Trump wins the election. We get this from Sent Uyghur to try to begin to create the narrative that there's nothing wrong with our election system. And here it is, and I want to get your response to it broadly. And I get a concession from the Trump supporters that your theory that Democrats were going to cheat and steal this election with voter fraud and undocumented immigrants was totally and completely wrong. I want to see if some of you still live in the reality-based world. David Clements, your response to Sent Uyghur and that narrative now that Trump has won.
Well, gave a response on Twitter, but it's not quite fit for after reading the Psalms. There's a different version of scrapping and fighting I treat this as war. And just so people know, I do not hold myself out as the epitome of holiness, but you see Twitter as a place where you go to fight. And I shared my feelings, but let me recapture them here. There's a way to put his claim to the test. Call for an audit. Call for an audit. It's like you're appealing to something that is not data driven. All of the people that have been fighting for election integrity, we made claims that the 2020 election was fraudulent because the data said it was. And the data is showing us that the 2024 election is fraudulent as well. It's just that Trump represents such a weak candidate when it comes to too big to rig because of all of the metrics, all of the branding, all of the endorsements, all of the work that's gone into election integrity to war game and deprive certain narratives from the radical left. And the real big victory was something that I wasn't really excited about, but looking back at it now, I'm like, okay, there's something there, which was early voting. I've long maintained that I don't think that you should show your hand. And I can't tell you technically why the metrics showed up the way that they did in a way that objectively favored Republicans, because I know that the people that control the integrated software could have inflated those numbers for Democrats. And so I don't have an answer, but that has nothing to do with the functional capability, that it could have been reported completely differently. So I'm wondering if some of the statewide outages affected that. It happened in South Dakota, it happened in my own state, where Total Vote, which is an integrated software, was not functioning properly, which has everything to do with voter registration and how you could inflate your rolls, create a ballot tied to a voter ID number, and then you have those run through the tabulators. So there were some miraculous technology blunders that I think affected how the narrative was being put out there. So that's miracle number one. But then you have this other component, which is the narratives propped up by the Democrats have long said that Republicans dominate election day voting. And so on the one hand, we took from them their most powerful narrative weapon, that early voting favors Democrats. And that didn't happen this time. So I think there's technological reasons why, but for whatever reason, when you add up the tallies of early voting and election day, they had a problem because they had the capability to create fake ballots out of thin air. They could have done all those things, but the believability, that was their problem. No one would believe it because the numbers were far superior in 2024 to 2020. I don't think it changes my perception of what needs to be done from a foundational clarity, but I've got questions on why is it that the legacy media backed down on certain things that they weren't willing to do in 2020. You didn't have people calling races prematurely. You actually had radical left media outlets basically saying that Trump is going to win the popular vote, which was unheard of. So it seems like actually a greater wisdom prevailed on behalf of Team Evil. And let me break this down on why I think this was actually wise on their part. If they would have done 2020 on steroids, it would have escalated their own demise. I think right now the contingency plan is, and actually the Chang post that you put out there really is their tell. Let's bring Trump in. That way we can diffuse any notion that the elections are rigged. Let's stop talking about the machines. Let's gaslight people that talk about the software. Let's surround him with swamp creatures. Let's inhibit him and let's live to fight another day. Because if they wanted to really create a scenario where it might have been more violent and more radical and might have been more turmoil, which is, I think, what we were all actually bracing for, was 2 months of absolute turmoil. This is like the serpent retreating. And let me figure out.
Not surrendering, just retreating.
Retreating. And then you'll notice that Biden says, now we can all agree that there's nothing wrong with our elections. Okay. You can have Liz Cheney, same thing. Let's take the high ground. Let's show you how it's done in the transition of power. So that's clear for anyone that has eyes to see that it really is about protecting the infrastructure, because they can wait it out. Trump presents too many problems. But with that said, that rigged architecture has screwed over so many down-ballot Republicans. It continues to do so, and look no further than Kari Lake's race, where I think Trump had more than 80,000 votes than Ruben Gallego. And yet Kari Lake, who is just as MAGA, huge supporter of Trump, is trailing that same Senate candidate. So there's a cognitive dissonance where there are Senate races that we should have picked up in Wisconsin, or states that we should have outright won. The rig is alive and well, but you have to really figure out, okay, what is the goal here? And right now, there are still efforts for the Democrats to challenge control of the House. And if the Democrats over the next 2 or 3 weeks count votes, find ballots coming in, you might have a scenario where Trump goes into this next administration limping, because he's not going to have both branches. I think he's going to prevail. There's something really magical going on, or providential, on how he seems to be ready to go. But those are my initial thoughts, kind of a few days after the election.
We are so honored to be affiliate partners for General Michael Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. Support General Flynn and the State of Freedom by shopping the Flynn Movie Store directly from the button on our homepage at freedomstate.us, or through our affiliate link, flynnmovie.com/TSOF podcast. On that site, you can purchase the DVD, which comes with a streaming link. You can pick up Flynn movie merchandise and get his complete 5GW book series.
David, have you seen, is the RNC still engaged in those places, like in the Kari Lake race? I know Charlie Kirk is over there in Arizona. He's keeping tabs on it. I'm sure there are hopefully hundreds of lawyer eyes on what's happening there. Is there enough in your mind from the RNC, from Concerned Patriots, to prevent the steal from happening in Arizona?
Okay, so this is weird. I've seen posts where Harmeet Dillon says they've got a presence and the GOP's got eyes on everything, but you have to put your trust in the GOP and people that are very, very, to me, rhino-esque. Maybe not full-blown rhino, but definitely they're not MAGA. And I can tell you right now that we've been in touch with people in the Kari Lake camp that are really worried that they're not looking at the right things. We keep buying into this political theater where we're going, oh, look at the latest batch of votes, and they favor Kari and she's climbing back. But if you've got a PID control function, you're going to have something that settles into a believable margin of victory. So you've got this huge spike, right? When we've seen this in Let My People Go and many other documentaries, that favors Gallego by tens of thousands of votes over Kari Lake. And so now the returns are being more favorable, but what you might end up seeing is this settling in to a margin of victory that may not be quite as fantastic for Gallego. But as we go along and we participate in their theater going, oh, wow, Kari Lake's clawing back. Is she really? So like the more time that we give the enemy to count, and you're looking at, okay, you get 70% in one day where they've counted. And to eke out a percent here, percent there, it's taking hours and hours and hours. None of this smells right.
Mm-mm.
So you're getting two different postures. One is RNC's on top of it, but from people that I know that are close to the campaign, they're looking for experts to come there and be ready to look at strategies. And but I'm kind of always the odd man out because, again, I talk about the infrastructure, and a lot of the advisors, campaign consultants are trying to advise Kari Lake based on this environment where they're in a vacuum. We don't talk about 2020. We don't talk about Dominion. We don't talk about ES&S. This is all about shoe leather. And it's a fatally flawed way of looking at things. And unfortunately, Harmeet Dillon and many of the people tied with the RNC, if to this day, still refuse to acknowledge the computerized fraud.
Yeah. David, are you suggesting here that they're trying to project an appearance of plausibility, an appearance of a competitive race when, because of the electronic manipulation, the outcome may already be preordained as we sit here?
Well, yeah, I think this gets back to contingency plans. I mean, everyone
I'm talking about Kari's race and these other Senate races where they're so very close, where Trump carries the state, yet you have these statewide Senate candidates who are very narrowly losing.
Yeah, so I think this is all about optics and knowing that many MAGA supporters are still very, very low resolution in how they look at elections. So many people are going, landslide, Trump won, and let's crack a beer and celebrate. And the rest of us are going, oh my goodness, this is actually much more pernicious than people believe. They knew that they weren't going to get anyone to believe that Harris outperformed Trump this time around. It's impossible. But Kari Lake, Senate candidate out of Nevada, that was a U.S. veteran. I mean, there's lots of races there where it's a siren call. It's not as bad as Professor Clements says it is. Stop, go back to sleep. Don't talk about the machines. So yeah, there's a level of projection that this is the way it is, but you've got some tells. Not only do you have the messaging from the radical left on some of the people that we just mentioned, you also have Maricopa County's recorder, Steve Richard. He took down his social media presence on Twitter. Like, they are scrambling. They are getting scrutinized with a ton of, I guess, eyeballs are on the bad actors there. And so on the one hand, it's like, okay, the legacy media has a bigger bullhorn and they're projecting what a lot of people are consuming, even within MAGA. And then you've got this silver lining that as they continue to do this ploy to rob Kari Lake of her race, the election integrity activists like myself can say, do you see how we're not wrong? Do you see how the machines are still at play? Do you see how all of these things are happening in these different states? And so in some ways, it gives us enough evidence day by day, hour by hour to combat the narrative with real-time effects on this system where clearly it's being exploited.
David, do you think that Elon is up to something? I mean, he looks really happy. He put so many posts out on Twitter about, I don't know, between Trump's cease and desist orders that he posted multiple times on X and Elon's like outrageous level of glee right now, it just makes me wonder if he's up to something, if they've been able to monitor the cheat this time, if there's anything happening in the backside that we can't see.
Yeah, well, I was kind of bracing for the World War III scenario where it calls it all of the fake ballots materialize. But then we would have all of the evidence that we had in 2020 with greater F curves on the election night reporting. And it was just going to be a matter of the American people standing up and withholding certification on obvious fraud. And that's kind of been my mentality. I'm thinking of the worst case scenario and how do I prepare patriots across the state to withhold. Now, Elon presents a certain conundrum for me because in that battleground of what I just described, he holds the keys to two very, very important weapons. One, he's like the largest contractor with the Department of Defense when it comes to satellites, and I've talked to people that are very, very familiar with how expensive it is to launch rockets, to launch satellites into space. And these aren't like one or two satellites. Thousands of satellites have been put into orbit over the past 6-7 years. And I've been told that the cost of doing this is comparable to the Manhattan Project. So if you were bracing yourself for like a blackout event, because everything's on the cloud, you have integrated software for all of our election systems for monitoring and potentially changing data, what would happen if you had a blackout event? Well, Elon kind of presents this back channel of, well, look what I control, your satellite infrastructure. Now let's take that one step further. What was the new branch of military that Trump
Space Force.
Space Force, which he was mocked and derided for. And I always thought it would be really, really ironic if the thing that he was mocked for ends up being the fail-safe for the American people. If you had a blackout, you'd have the ability through satellite dominance, through the military. You got Elon, and then you got Elon already testing the use of an alternate internet system through Starlink, which was thrown out through the hurricane victims in North Carolina and elsewhere. And so he's the only person that I know of in the civilian / government sector that has the technological chops to provide that fail-safe in the event that things went dark for a period of time. I'm really, really pleased with Elon, because at first he presents so many paradoxes that you're like, okay, he's wearing like the Baphomet costume on his screen profile. Like either he's trolling, it looks like he's trolling now, but at the time we're like, who would do that? He's in charge of all of these Tesla green type technologies, yet we know that the Green New Deal is dangerous. We talk about this new cult where you can change your body through technology, and he's the head of Neuralink. But you have to just press pause and say, okay, I want to look at his fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been no greater force multiplier this time around than Elon Musk. And so I think we owe him a great deal of thanks.
I think so too. And I love, when you think about the Baphomet costume and all of these paradoxes, when he came out in the black MAGA hat and called it dark MAGA, I was like, oh my goodness, he is just the master troll. That was just so beautiful to me. I loved it so much. And I need to get a dark MAGA hat. So if anyone knows where I can get one, or if they want to send one, just give me a call. So where do you think we go from here, David?
Well, I shared this on a different show that I think you have to look thin and you have to look buff. And it's probably a combination of both. You probably have to look above first before you look within. But meaning my journey in this whole movement started with a supernatural experience on January 6, 2021. And the degree that I've had an impact on anything related to election integrity, it really had nothing to do with strategy. It was just a question of obedience to, all right, I hear the small, still whisper on being obedient for a task that was set aside today that led to a larger platform and more tasks. And if God carried us through to this miracle 4 years in the making, and I'm a completely different person than I was 4 years ago, and it was all born of the Holy Spirit saying, go, go, go. And I hope that I can caution the patriot out there that you probably should press pause and not have the hubris to think, I'll take it from here. We've got plans. Perhaps we should just say, okay, Lord, thank you, express gratitude, and take a period, not a long period because we don't have a lot of time, but just to listen. Like, all right, Holy Spirit, what would you have me do now? Because I think right now you're seeing a lot of people, myself included, that are really struggling with contentment and wanting to be restored. And where's that line between being a troll and becoming what you hate about the left? And like, I'm going through a bunch of different emotions on, all right, we won. Now, can I have my name back? Can I have my reputation back? Can I have a job? And there's a lot of people like me that are situated in similar circumstances. And it's almost like there's a feeding frenzy of who can get to a position of exaltation. How do I get, close to Trump? And I'd be lying to you if I wasn't at least thinking about, it would be really cool to protect this victory in some way where you actually have the wind at your back, as opposed to climbing up the mountain where you're being mocked and having hit pieces written about you. And so I think there needs to be a level of spiritual work where we go, okay, I really need to claim the promises and understand what the good book says about the landscape. Because when you read that psalm, you notice that he talks about names being inscribed on the buildings. And so even then, it's like there's this penchant for people to want to exalt themselves. And we know that the Bible says that God's not going to exalt anyone that exalts themselves. And then I look at most federal courthouse buildings and highways. Go to Texas. Most of those highways are named after the Bushes, or you go to Domenici building up in New Mexico. And all these people are actually being exposed right now as traitors to the country. Large part, right? So I know that's a long answer, but I think it's a fuller answer of where I'm at from just kind of a soul health standpoint, that if we're going to be saved, it's not going to be because eureka, we've got the perfect strategy. It's how do we submit ourselves to making sure that every word, thought, and deed is captive to what the Holy Spirit wants for us, wants for our nation. He only wants what's good. And then finding a way to come into alignment with what the Holy Spirit's telling us. And that's the challenge, because part of my flesh is like, man, let's go. Get me to an agency where I can start trying people for treason. I mean, I've got all kinds of fantastic dreams of, where's the hangman's rope on the people that did this to make sure this never happens again. And that's my desire. I don't know if that's what God wants for me. And when I get some clarity, I'm sure that if it's God's will, there'll be a platform to do something amazing. But right now, I think the goal is you're going to see the lie on mainstream media repeated again and again. And for the time being, let's combat the lie with truth again and again and again to make sure that social media is saturated with the discourse of patriots versus the propagandist. And just, I guess the final word on this subject is a lot of this hangs on whether Trump is who we think he is. So there's an article of faith that even though he still surrounds himself with people that are highly questionable, that I'm scratching my head, he has produced great fruit in spite of the fact that he continues to surround himself with people that I've got question marks about.
Yeah.
And I just have to believe that he is serious about eradicating the deep state. And there's a post that he initially aired about a year or so ago about his transition plan. I actually thought it was a new video where he's talking about how he's going to remove the deep state, and it'll give you goosebumps. It's like, holy smokes. And it hits differently now, because back then you're like, well, you got to win. How are you going to win? How are you going to defeat the rigged elections? But he did. So now when you watch, you're like, this guy has been thinking about how to really put the deep state, the intelligence apparatus, in its place. And the reason why that's so hopeful for someone like me is that you understand that the election system is a creature of the intelligence agencies. It's not what people think. It's not like this, free market of vendors that happen to get in. It's completely created by DHS, CIA to put a thumb on us. And if he dismantles the deep state, then the election system, the attendant election system, will implode. So yeah, I'm really encouraged, but time is of the essence.
Yeah. David, do you think that Trump has learned from his first term? A lot of people believe, and I was one of them, that he went into his first term as a businessman, not as a politician. And I'm not even sure he fully understood the depth of the corruption and the depravity in our federal government. Do you think he's learned from his first term, and do you think that he will be a little bit more careful and a little bit more vigilant about who he takes advice from and who he appoints to various agency heads and that sort of thing?
I'm going to give you a very, very complicated answer, because I don't think that everything that Trump says you have to take at face value. Like, he went on Joe Rogan and he talked about, I made mistakes. There's certain people I just didn't know. I don't really.
John Bolton.
Yeah, well, but I don't believe that. I don't believe him there.
I'm with you on this.
I think he understands that there's a perception and that there are narratives that are being put out there. And I think this goes back to the art of war, where it's easier to navigate terrain at a nation state level with an enemy that you see right before you that you can monitor, as opposed to getting rid of that enemy and importing something that is a variable that you can't account for. And so we keep thinking that there was a historical framework where Trump could have conceivably surrounded himself with all people that were peers of the driven snow. And that's just not reality at a nation state level. You have people that are constantly trying to acquire trust through false pretenses. And so I think Trump, even though he gives the story about John Bolton, my buddy told me that John Bolton's a bad guy. Anybody that wasn't living under a rock knew that John Bolton for the past 25 years is a piece of garbage. And if you look at Trump's tweet history prior to 2016, he talked about how going into Iraq was a mistake. So we're talking about a decade previous, him being super on the ball, knowing the pulse of the American people on our mistakes in foreign policy. Well, who was behind that foreign policy for the most part? People like John Bolton. So I think what he did is he brought him close. He used them. He actually talked about, I do believe this, he talked about how he used, because everyone was afraid that because John Bolton was there, we're going to go to war. Please don't bomb us. Please don't go to war with us. And he put him out front. John Bolton was ridiculed and we didn't go to war. And I think you could say the same thing about General Mattis, who at one point was held in high regard by the Marines, but certainly did not want to take orders from a civilian commander-in-chief, which is the Constitution. You've got Anthony Fauci, the ironic nature of, okay, as the case count was going on TV of all the different COVID cases, the first instinct was, why isn't he listening to the most vaunted expert? Fauci, people are dying. I mean, and so I think he knew, okay, I'm going to put him as part of my advisory team. I'm going to put him out front, and then I'm going to start out front, and then I'm going to start undermining him day one. So it's genius in the way that he does that. So the question now is he going to, I think there was a need to expose the corruption and the main players of the deep state. And that was necessary in the first administration. So what looked like disorganized chaos, what looked like a guy that was just always searching for a yes man, you look back and say, no, I think he actually was doing something at a much more high level. I mean, it's art when you think about it. He exposed people, and the only way that you can accomplish that is to see it, experience it, and then look at his fruit. But now you're looking at his first appointment for his chief of staff, and this really goes to the heart of your question, Susie Wiles. A lot of people were looking at Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles as not being great for the campaign, especially on election integrity. Huge sums of money taken to run the ads, and that was his first appointment. So either he hasn't learned if you just look at what's going on there, or again, he's playing a much more elevated game, and he's relying on tools that are outside of our reach from a classification standpoint. So just a few minutes ago, I talked about Starlink, satellites, Space Force. Just keep this in mind. Past 4 years, we have been talking about every single tool and strategy to protect the vote. And the most powerful weapon out there was something that none of us could validate. None of us could test. We can't test satellites. We can't test, we can't see the contours of what Space Force extends to. And yet that was looming large in the background in an amazing way. So I'm of the mind that knows that there's certain people in this movement that are good at what they do, and that may not make them a good person. But Conservative Inc., I can't stand Conservative Inc. I'm fighting against their crappy messaging every day. But at the end of the day, Conservative Inc. has people in their orbit that have millions of followers. I don't. So when you think of like the utility of Trump trying to saddle up next to people and be effective as a general on the field, you take the field as you find it, and you use people in a way that still carries out your agenda. Also, yeah, I don't agree with Scott Bressler and Charlie Kirk and Jack Posobiec on a whole host of things election related, but you add up their social media followers compared to mine. There's a reason why Trump's showing up to Turning Point events, going on stage. And so I guess I'm going to have to wrestle with contentment on the idea that I know the movers and shakers in this movement that really put their heart and soul into improving the understanding of what we're up against. And they're nameless, faceless patriots that are overlooked. And they're really doing everything that they've done over the past 4 years, not because there's a promise of, I get to join Conservative Inc., I get to get a good gig. It's the exact opposite. It's like, Lord, I'm serving you. I love you. You put this on my heart. The truth matters. You just have to believe that that same spirit that's innervating millions and millions of believers will work its way into Trump's administration, in the White House, and certainly on the man himself.
Yeah. David, you talk about, the millions of followers that these other guys have and that you don't have, even though you have a substantial following. Would you say that it is because of your efforts and men and women like you that Trump very recently has come out and said, we need secure hand-marked paper ballots, same-day voting? You have Elon Musk who comes out and says, basically, it's an insanity that we're using these election machines. Tucker Carlson has said, we've got to get rid of these voting machines. So there seems to be some real fruit to your efforts, even though many in the conservative movement don't share our views on the hand-marked voting machines and same-day counting, all that. But it seems like we have gained some significant momentum with regard to doing away with these machines. And I would suggest that is in significant part due to your tireless efforts and others like you. What say you?
Well, I don't know. I like, look, platform. Like, yeah, I've got a bigger platform than most people. But on the scale of War Room and these people, I'll give you a few metrics. On Telegram, it had as many as 150,000 followers, and it was just ramping up like crazy. And then I did the Cyber Symposium, and I talked about the machines. And as soon as the powers that be more or less could see that I was over the target on the real culprit, my follower count degraded to the point where I've got like 64,000, which still sounds like a lot, but it makes you wonder, like, why in the world would I ascend only to come down? And then on Rumble, got a channel with 28,000 followers. I skyrocketed to 28,000 followers 3.5 years ago. I have not budged from the same number in 4 years, and I've done thousands of shows and let my people go. As suppressed as it is, I've got crude metrics that show that it's been seen by tens of millions of people. So like, you think about most, like the Pareto distribution, there's a certain science on how things go viral. How in the world is it that I can get the film out and have it seen by millions of people? Then I go on Twitter and it's like 25,000 people. So again, it sounds like a lot, but I've seen people that have contributed nothing, do nothing, that I've never seen, never heard. And their follower count is just like, wow, like they're talking about inconsequential nonsense. And I guess maybe that's what people want. So that's one element where I'm like, all right, is this just me whining because I don't have it? Or am I trying to be objective? Like, what is it? Because there used to be a time if you got to like 10,000 views or 100,000 views on a video, it goes viral. With me, I've kind of had to deal with this idea that I get to like 100,000 views and then nothing happens, which is intuitively so different than the way it's supposed to work. As for the second issue, do I think that I've had an impact? The reason why I don't know is that I know we made efforts to Let My People Go to Tucker. I know he received it. I don't know if he watched it. We sent it to the president. I know he received it. I don't know if he watched it. And all the people that you just mentioned, I know they've had access to it. And their talking point certainly is in alignment with the prescription that we offer in the film.
That's my point. Yeah, my point. Yeah.
But again, I get kind of frustrated because the idea is, man, if you really want to help the American people, why didn't you share it? Like when, and that's just me. Like, man, it would be great if Tucker would just say, hey, I checked this out. Maybe you should look at it because the machines are a big deal and this explains it. And you'd have an audience of, 80 million people just like that being educated by the film. And I've wargamed why that perhaps hasn't happened. And I think there's a question of not believing that the American people are mature enough to watch the film without being demoralized. And so if you're going into election season and you've got a plan for early voting and you've got a plan for election day voting, most people that I know that watch the film, they're like, no, we're inspired. We're not giving up our vote, but we have to deal with the machine issue. I think part of their calculus is, I don't want to risk the chance that this movie negates the perception that we've got momentum on early voting. And if that's the case, I can see the wisdom of it. But now that we're through election day, it would be really cool if the American people were vindicated that they're not crazy and that there is a film that really does explain the nuts and bolts of this in a way that we should all be very, very confident that our election system needs to go. So to this date, long answer once again, I have not been invited to sit at the big kids table. Any of these people, there are times where I'm like, man, it would make my life so much easier. But in some ways it's fitting because I've always felt like I've kind of been more a part of the people and infantry. And every once in a while I get to give a report on War Room or on the big shows. But the real foundation that I think the film has provided for true activists is that you're not going to be able to convince anyone that's seen that film to back away from the truth. And I know it's been seen by, so we've got millions of people that know the system better than any clerk in the country. And when you've got that kind of strength and knowledge, there's no way you're going to convince me that we're not going to get rid of the machines.
Yeah. And I certainly hope we see some suits brought that have teeth, that aren't dismissed, that are brought to the right, judges, that are brought in the right districts. We can't just keep going forward like we have. We talked to Mark Cook yesterday, who I think you know pretty well. And this is where I end up. I'm like, okay, we can't just switch to a paper ballot system and pretend like nothing happened before now. We need restitution. We need the candidates who are going to fight for the people now to be in place. We need to take back those roles, those spots now. And I don't know what the mechanism for that is. I know it will most likely involve courts, and I pray that it gets taken up in a way that vindicates all of the election integrity fighters.
I think the mechanism's actually the same that I've been advocating for since October of 2021. So when people come to me, like right now, there are many races in New Mexico, congressional races, where all of a sudden the people that were whispering that Dave Clements and Aaron Clements are terrible because of whatever, because I didn't fit the establishment orthodoxy on elections, they were screwed out of their races. And so they've contacted us after they've slandered us for years on, will you take a look at the data that shows everything that you've described? And we do it. But it comes down to the prescription of, wait a minute, if you want to have power, you have to elevate people. We, the people, have to be the arbiters. And now that we're successful through a Trump victory, this is the time to go to these county commissioners and say, it's not up to a judge. The judge isn't certifying what happened in my county as true and accurate.
Yeah.
3 people are. And the clerk, you're the one that's certifying that tabulator that is showing all kinds of errors. No one else is forcing you to sign off a piece of paper and say that that thing is true and accurate. You're doing it. And so if you want to leverage strength, you do it at the battlefront where the initial decision's being made. So every single candidate that right now is scratching their head thinking, I'm one of those down ballot races where I got screwed out of victory, stop thinking in terms of lawsuits and start thinking in terms of the 3 to 5 people that are first going to rubber stamp a fraudulent election in your own backyard. And what you'll find is you got massive freedom to deploy all of your poll watchers, all of your supporters, to have a showing to go to these commission meetings. So that's happening here. And that's the same advice we're giving to the Carrie Lake team. Carrie Lake's got a massive grassroots following in Arizona. There's no reason why they couldn't go to Cochise County, Mojave. And if you're going to slow roll election results like this and find ballots out of thin air and have no accountability, you're going to keep illegal citizens or non-U.S. citizens on the rolls and not fix that. There is a solution. And right now you've got the mandate. So you actually get to go in there on the higher ground. It's like, this isn't about obviously Republicans winning because Trump won. But even then we've got a problem. And then another example in a place where that's much more far gone than Arizona, because Arizona, they voted for Trump. Go to Colorado.
Yeah.
Completely rigged. And what did we learn out of Colorado? Griswold had the BIOS passwords that left their system wide open. And so the question is, every single candidate has standing to withhold certification and ask for chain of custody documentation on absentee ballots, cast vote records, because it's like, how in the world can you expect us to just rubber stamp this when for 4 months or so, anyone in the world could have accessed that system? And the only way that we can determine that is if you turn over the source code, if you turn over the system logs to experts. So there are thousands of counties that, even though we've got the Trump victory, and the reason why I'm not trying to make waves and disturb the Trump win is that I'm convinced that if you do an audit, all it's going to do is showcase that Trump won by a far greater margin than what was reported on TV. And you're probably going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of local state races that would be turned over to the appropriate victor.
Do you think anyone in Colorado in a position to refuse certification has the backbone to do it now that they've seen what's happened to Tina Peters?
Yesterday, I was on the phone with a certifying member. I won't disclose the county because I know they'll come after them, but they're pissed. They saw two commissioner races in particular that were rigged and stolen. And so we provided some of the legal analysis of what can be done. And I have firm belief that instead of like 3 or 4 counties withholding certification, that you're probably going to have maybe 50, hopefully more counties that are sitting there going, okay, wait a minute, enough is enough. So Colorado certainly has some counties in play where they're not going to certify. I firmly believe that.
Danielle asked Mark Cook yesterday, David, whether or not Colorado is in fact a blue state. Do you think Colorado is really a blue state? Do you think Kamala Harris really got 80% of the vote in Denver County? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think you have to rely, unfortunately, on anecdotal evidence of what do you see. So when you have Trump come out to Aurora and you've got a sea of patriots out there, you know how hard it is to, within days' notice, just have people spontaneously show up in an airfield for a candidate. Like, we take it for granted. So that's a touchstone in reality that obviously the kind of the best polls are how people are talking. Or you'll look at polls, maybe not on Truth, but on Twitter, that's open to the left and the right. And uniformly what you find is that people that are polled on their preference over Trump or Biden, it's like an 80-20 split, always in favor of Trump. 80-20, 80-20. So I think that's the reality. I think if you did a hand count, paper ballot race, single day election, that Trump would win all 50 states, including Colorado. I believe that without a single doubt. I've been to California, I've been to New York, I've been to these places. Maybe they don't all love Trump, but they loathe Harris. No one was excited about Harris or Biden going into this. And if there was ever a time to have a landslide victory where you could conceivably outdo Reagan, I forget which election. I think he only lost Minnesota. There was one year where he won 49 states.
84.
This would be the time.
Yeah, they all The only state that Walter Mondale won was his home state of Minnesota. Yeah, 1984. But David, let me switch gears for a second here and ask you. I know you talked about the Wiles appointment. You had mentioned, or someone had mentioned, I think you may have reposted something about Clarence Thomas if he retires from the Supreme Court, possibly being appointed Attorney General. Do you think that would be a good pick?
Well, that was Laura Logan. So like, I think we're all in our dream mode of like, wouldn't it be great to have this person? I don't know if he would do it, but boy, would that be cool. Get a fresh appointment and have Clarence Thomas, just whose integrity is unimpeachable, man the post for 4 years in a different role. Because he's not going to be intimidated. He's not going to be bullied. He understands the constitutional contours of all the things that are going to head the Supreme Court's way. And I'm excited about it. I'll give you another one that I'm really excited about is the prospect of Elon Musk partnering with Ron Paul. Ron Paul was my original kind of red pill dispenser. And everything that Ron Paul talked about right now has become mainstream through Trump. And so I would call Ron Paul the greatest philosophical libertarian of my lifetime on just expositing the tenets or the principles of a constitutional libertarian like republic. And I'd say Trump is the greatest practical libertarian that does not articulate the philosophy, but when you look at what he does, it's like slashing regulations, getting rid of the income tax. I mean, it's amazing to behold the potential opportunities here. But Clarence Thomas, I don't know if that's realistic. I think if you're going to retire from a distinguished career, I'm not sure that that's his temperament. He's always been a guy that is very reserved, rarely talks during oral arguments. And there's something about the attorney general position that you have to get in front of cameras and be the guy that debriefs and guides the way. I don't see it as his personality, but I would be delighted if he was appointed.
Would you mind naming a few right now, David, who are jockeying for positions and who are trying to cozy up to Trump, who are prominent figures who you would absolutely recommend against ever being anywhere near the White House?
Well, Mike Pompeo, which is kind of weird because if you follow any of the Q devolution posts, and I'm not an expert in this, but there are posts where Pompeo was referred to as, I guess, Kansas was his code name. Mm-hmm. And there's a post that says, trust Kansas. And just a few days ago, he put out a very, very serious tweet about, as I was saying, talking about a smooth transition. So this gets back to, do you have the capacity to believe that there was a larger white hat operation that was working behind the scenes where certain people that look like enemies at face value or perhaps playing a part? I don't know. So the people that right now are getting their blood pressure going through the roof that think that Q is, a version of Operation Trust and it's just, it's dangerous, get it. But when you see that, you're like, okay, what does it mean? All I know is that after 2020, if you just take Mike Pompeo at his word, he did not stand up publicly for the president. He seemed to be very, very okay with the idea that we certify the results. And so if there's an ultimate white hat plan, trust Trump on his decision as to whether or not someone like Pompeo comes back in. But if you're just looking at words and actions that are visible to me, the guy completely sold out Donald Trump. I think the same could be said about, it's not Pompeo, but Bill Barr. Yeah. Bill Barr. I will not provide you with a slight wrinkle like I did with Pompeo. Bill Barr, my familiarity with him back, to the late 70s, early 80s. There was a book called The Secret Team that really discusses just how corrupt deep state is. And Bill Barr is littered throughout the machinations of the creation of the deep state as we know it now. And there's no universe that you can convince me that he is a patriot playing a part. So hope that he does not come anywhere near the White House. He's changing his tune and his talking points. People that are jockeying right now, and maybe it's presumptuous on positions, but certainly they have greater exposure than someone like me, would be Kash Patel. I think he's been loyal. I think his messaging has been spot on. I don't get to play in that part of the pool, but Kash Patel is someone that I think would be a really good choice. Mike Davis, some people are kind of on the fence on whether or not he's, as pure as the driven snow. Gregory Stenstrom did a wonderful breakdown of kind of the council and this kind of cartel-like structure that you only get certain positions if you get approved by Team Evil. And but Mike Davis certainly talks the talk, and he certainly has advocated for Trump on War Room in ways that are like, I like the messaging. So those two seem to be the ones that are either promoting themselves or have been promoted by others to take the position of AG. And then you've got the big question mark over General Flynn. Was he playing a part, an exposure part? Is he an ultimate white hat? Or, and I don't know. He's another conundrum where there's just question marks on whether he's been running several psyops that are actually good for the nation, but maybe at times confusing, because when you look at the intelligence agencies, and this is one of the reasons why I have come to blows with many people like General Flynn over the past 4 years, is that the whole point of spycraft is to gain trust under false pretenses. And that's a very, very different way of living than the biblical framework of let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so things that might be done for the greater good that aren't absolutely true bother me. So I've had to make peace with acknowledging that there might be something there where you've got landmines that you're setting in psychological warfare to wake people up. That still gets you to the same place, but how you get there is very different from an old school prosecutor.
What about the admonition, David, to be as shrewd as serpents?
Yeah, so I think the only place where I've given this caveat, even though I've crossed swords with many people in the intelligence community where we've bloodied each other up because I just care about the truth, is if you believe that we're in a war, an information war or Cold War, then you have to concede that there's a place for permissible deception. You never telegraph your plans to the enemy. And so that allows certain people that are in that world to be all over the place and in some ways be duplicitous and a recitation of actual facts. And so I've held out in my mind that there's a possible place for people like Patrick Byrne and General Flynn to be all over the place because perhaps they're working under security clearances that allow them to do that, or classification privileges that allow them to do that where I can't do that. But it's just speculation on my part. And so I look at some of the initiatives in election integrity spaces that had funding from those gentlemen and pseudo experts that were injected into those initiatives that I think set back movement from a standpoint of getting to the truth of how our elections work and don't work. You could say fairly that they still planted seeds of doubt on the integrity of the system. There's no doubt that they've done that. And in some ways, we're both doing that. But I don't want that to be my end goal if it's not true. I want to work my process methodically and say, okay, I can take it to the bank that this has been subverted, this has been subverted, this has been subverted, and therefore we don't use it. And so there's this conflict between truth seekers that really care about the granularity down to the most minute detail that we need to tell the truth all the time versus a team of people that are going, okay, we knew that they were going to steal the White House. Let's deploy psychological warfare to have things explode at strategic times to awaken the masses. And the purity of the truth really isn't as important in that realm as it is in my realm. And so I may have described this last time I was on the show. I have kind of three piles: patriot, bad guy, and then the question mark pile. And some people navigate all three piles depending on the day. And I'll tell you this: I pray for people like General Flynn, that he is an ultimate white hat behind the scenes. I pray for someone like Patrick Byrne, even though he's put out statements like, that are just mind-numbingly infuriating at some points. There's talk about going to a coalition government instead of our constitutional framework, where you basically have our government led by Mike Flynn and Susan Rice. So like my head wants to explode when I hear about the prospect of basically a step towards the New World Order, if you translate what he's saying. And so, yeah, it's one of those things. But every time I raise those questions, the people that are loyal to their factions, like, they come after me with, their hair on fire, like I'm disturbing harmony in the movement. And so I've had to try with whatever wisdom. When you talk about being wise as serpents, I've tried my best to not galvanize opposition needlessly and get to audiences and tell them what I know. But it's been a learning process. I mean, 2022, about an 8-month period, my name was mud in this movement, because I was holding people to account on certain things that they said. And a lot of people didn't want to hear it. So,
Well, David, you know what Mark Twain said. Whenever I read this, I think of you. In the beginning, the patriot, when he's doing his work, is always scorned and hated and reviled and lonely. And then when his cause ultimately prevails and people see the wisdom of what he did, then they come and join him, even though they're meek, because at that point it costs nothing to be a patriot. And I always associate you with that. Quite frankly, I don't think you give yourself nearly enough credit for the extraordinary good that you've done, specifically with regard to election integrity. And I can tell you, I do not think it's at all coincidental that the Letting the People Go documentary and the timing of all that, and the move by big figures like Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk and Trump toward the secure hand-marked paper ballots, that is not coincidental in my mind. So hats off to you for that.
I would love to, hey, look, if there's a parade and we get to bask in the glow of victory, I mean, I don't go there. It's not that I don't want everything that you're saying to like get an attaboy from lots of people, including the president. But I also know that if my mind goes there, then some level of resentment is going to fester and so for me, it's just a healthy meditation to go, okay, there is the Mark Twain quote. And then there's also the life of Paul, who didn't get an attaboy ever. He had a 30-year ministry where he was imprisoned, beaten, whipped, and eventually had his head cut off. And so I'm sitting there going, do I have the capacity as a believer that if I don't get vindication, if I don't get my job back, if I don't get my name back, can I have faith that the greatest transaction where your bank account it's full is the divine transaction? That, if people forget about everything that I've been a part of over the past 4 years, can I say, it is well with my soul, Lord, it's all about you. You see it. And if I get to have a kind of quiet send off where there's no pomp and circumstance, that's good, because I want to protect my heavenly bank account. And I think anytime we start shoplifting God's glory in ways that it's like, hey, remember me. It's not that I don't wrestle with it. I really do wrestle with the vanity that comes with just wanting to be recognized, right? Who doesn't? But it's a safer place. It's a safer place to say, I'm going to try to think of the worst servant-like position and pray that I can be content being at the bottom. Because if we've got peace and my children have a future and I've got food on the table, really, it's not a bad.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/DWalker. Get to shopping, that helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information.
Amen. Well, David, before we let you go, I want to pick up on your point of vindication. What is your expectation for what will happen once Trump's inaugurated with regard to the J6ers and Tina Peters even?
He has indicated heavily that he will issue pardons. There have been certain groups that have started to come together that want to do an individual examination of nonviolent versus violent offenders. And I hope they don't go that route, because it'll be time consuming, it's unjust, and really loses sight of what really happened there, which is that the people that were violent, that weren't fed insurgents, were practicing self-defense, either of property or the other persons that were murdered right in front of them. So you can see video of Jake Lang holding up a baseball bat and a gas mask, and you go, wow, salacious. He doesn't deserve a pardon based on the photographs, but you realize that Roseanne Boylan was murdered right in front of him, that people were being stabbed in the head with sticks, were shot in the face with rubber bullets, that there were toxic gases that were sent out into the crowd that put them into a defensive posture where they have a right to defend themselves. At that point, the question is whether or not the conduct of the officers was lawful, and I don't believe it was. And what I'm hoping what will break in the next 2 months that will make this a nothing burger on whether they do an individual assessment versus a blanket pardon is that the Inspector General still hasn't released a full list of the hundreds of embedded FBI agents, which would denote massive entrapment. And anyone that's taken a rudimentary law course knows the doctrine of the fruit of the poisonous tree, that if you've got entrapment on a scale of hundreds of embedded agents, even the ones that you don't like how they handle themselves and were a bit violent, procedurally, they need to be vindicated. So we're looking for full pardons of innocence, not commutation of sentences. And the other thing that could happen is that whoever he appoints as Attorney General can just outright dismiss the DOJ's cases that are pending, those that haven't gone to trial. But those folks still need to be made whole through some form of restitution. So I'm coming up to speed right now on pardon power and how it can be done. There's a lady that wrote a fantastic book on it that I'm working myself through right now. But I'm hoping and praying that on January 20th, that as soon as he sits down, there'll be a blanket pardon, at least a first wave. And my intention is to be in D.C. for the inauguration, but more importantly, to be outside the D.C. Gulag. And I pledge that I will be there when those doors open and we have J6ers that come out that I've never met in person. I don't know if they know me, but they're going to get a hug from me, everyone that comes out there. And if that means it takes 2 or 3 days to do it, that to me is the happy ending to this story.
Yeah. And what about Tina Peters, David? Our understanding is that because these are state charges, they're not federal charges, even though the feds may have had some involvement early on, that Trump would not have the jurisdictional authority to pardon her. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding. It's a state law violation, so she's going to need a pardon from the governor of the state, who is a corrupt Marxist. So in an ideal world, under a Trump administration, I think you go after Jenna Griswold for federal violation. It's tantamount to treason. You make an example of what she's done, and then you expedite the appeal based on legal error at the state level in Colorado to where she's released. And there's such public scrutiny and elevation of what Jenna Griswold did versus the lawful conduct of Tina Peters that they switch places. But you can't rely on the governor issuing a pardon. This really comes down to having the contrast and having a righteous prosecution of Jenna Griswold and an appellate victory that remands the case back to that corrupt Judge Barrett, or who should be excused. He should probably be tried for some type of RICO cartel-like behavior because his sentence was just over the top. So I think you have to really put your faith that hopefully Dan Hartman, I think John Case, the attorneys that were representing her have a great record on appeal. I know that they do. And I'm hoping and praying that they get some relief with a quick decision to remand to get her out of custody. And then I think at that point, the sentiment of a new administration, I just can't conceive of a trier of fact sending her back to jail with things that are being unearthed right now.
Yeah, certainly a case that demands and begs for justice. David Clements, it's such a pleasure to have you with us as always. You are, well, it's no secret, you're my favorite guest, and we've had 250 something now. So God bless you, sir. Godspeed, and we will talk soon. Thanks again.
Well, I love joining with y'all. I always feel like the Holy Spirit is, and I don't feel this with every show, like this, the Spirit's just present, and it's just a delight to talk with y'all. And so anytime I get an invitation, just I'll be on.
Amazing. Thank you, David. We love you. We appreciate you, and we're praying for you. I'm ready to see you try some people for treason.
Me too. I've even told folks that I'd be willing to join the JAG Corps and get a haircut.
Because your morning will be over.
I could fast track to a tribunal where the due process goes way down, and you can line up an Eric Coomer and a John Paulos and everyone else that's done this devastating theft of our voice at a level that I just never would have thought. That would be the one way you could get me to get a haircut. Is I'll enlist. Let's do it.
Did you see that Sherry Tenpenny was nominated for a role at HHS? To me, that just signals that the COVID stuff is going to be blown to smithereens.
I didn't see that. And so like, this is kind of one of those things where I will just cheer on all of those appointments. And then the other thing is, if that doesn't happen, because I've been so vocal about it that I probably have already shown that I can't be impartial by virtue of saying what was just said. But I would love to have a position somewhere that has no title, that's completely, you don't see it, you don't touch it, there's no public aspect, just to make sure that there's eyes on the deep state. When Trump put out that video a year ago that's resurfaced now, was put out by Elon Musk, he talked about having some independent way to review DHS, the CIA. And when you know that our infrastructure on elections is completely intertwined with those people, if you want to ensure your elections are secure going forward, all you've got to do is dismantle the CIA and all these other places. I say all you've got to do. But it's going to take people that really have a loathing of the spook culture to sit there and go, okay, I'm on to you. So that when he was talking about certain potential councils and things that materialized, I'm sitting there going, man, that would be a cool position, because I wouldn't have to be in front of a microphone. I wouldn't have to say anything. It's just like, let's effectuate the dismantling of the swamp. And that would be a lot of fun. So that's kind of the dream in the back of my head. But there's also a different dream where I'd be completely fine working at a hardware store and just like, I'm tuning out for like a year or two. I'm going to get the discount, and I'm working on my cabin and just go fishing or something like that. I don't fish. All right. Well,
Detox.
God bless you all.
God bless you, David.
God bless you, David. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today on The State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit LACAG.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.